students and faculty, administrators, and they were trying to figure out what resources were available for them to think about leadership. And most of them admitted that they were reading secular leadership resources. Back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of stuff was written about transformational leadership, servant leadership, but none of it was really, for the most part, written by Christians. And I had the opportunity with my wife and 2 of our 3 kids to go to the Middle East and to do some research and to see what it was that made shepherding so useful in the Bible, and if it was still useful today. I wrote a couple of books about it. One of them I'm going to present to Philip today because it's a 40-day journey for shepherds, and I thought maybe you all would agree that you ought to spend the next 40 days reading 1 chapter a day and get off to a good start along with his new staff. There's a couple of convictions that I have as a result of the research, and even more so as a result of being with people from a variety of different traditions in the Christian church, from a variety of different ministry positions. And that is that you can't do without calling. There's no purpose in talking about technique. There's no purpose in talking about roles. There's no purpose in talking about the choices that you make for change management, conflict management, etc. In Jeremiah 3:15, a real signature verse for me and for a lot of our work at Gordon-Conwell Leadership, God says to people who are going into exile, you're going into exile because you had poor leaders. But what does God say so characteristically? But I will give you shepherds after my own heart, and they will lead you with knowledge and understanding. It's the heart that's the heart of the matter for the shepherd. And it's that calling where God says, I'll give you shepherds, that is the beginning of the journey of leadership. We're friends of Gigi and Phillips, and we've heard the story of how your pastor has recognized a calling in Phillips' life and in their life together to be shepherds in this church. And I believe all of you recognize that God has called them. And that calling is the place to begin. God said, I'll give you shepherds after my own heart who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. The knowledge and understanding takes a lifetime. I had many shepherds in the Middle East. I asked, what does it take to be a good shepherd? Some of them said, well, it's too late for you. You need a whole lifetime. Some of them said, one in particular said, if you have the heart for it, you can begin tomorrow. And I think the heart for it is what you've recognized, and you also are engaging with your pastor in a lifelong journey of learning, of mutual education. That's what you're in for. By the way, I started and ended my book with some quotes from some Indian shepherds. He didn't know that, but one of them says, hey, mister, what is there to research about us? This is from up in northwest India. We're nothing, just spend our lives running after sheep and goats, neither home nor an address. Sleeping under the open sky in winter, summer, and rains, year after year, we measure the length of roads by our feet, carrying cooking utensils on camels and mules, can't even rest in one place for a week. Why waste time, then, yours and ours? But there is something about being a shepherd that matters a great deal, because the heart of the shepherd is wrapped by certain roles that are really hard to describe in any other vocation, except perhaps parents. And even kings and elders, people that served in the communities in the ancient world, and even today in countries like Jordan, will refer to their leaders as shepherds. They do it with a sense that this metaphor carries with it 3 aspects. One of them is provision. The pastor's role is to provide for the flock. And the most immediate and obvious way that a pastor provides for the flock is to feed. The pastor is also one who retrieves. The providing shepherd is the one who looks after the needs of the flock. And those needs include healing, feeding, retrieving, and a host of other activities. But all of them start with a heart of compassion. It's not just a role set. It's not just a job description. It's a heart of compassion that says, your needs are my needs. Now that isn't by any means an invitation to simply be passive as a congregation and say, feed me. He will lead you to pastures where you will eat. And that's your role, is to respond to that leadership and to recognize that he's giving you an invitation. The second aspect of a shepherd is to protect. In this way, the heart of the shepherd is not only compassionate, but courageous. The shepherd has to recognize wolves. One of the most alarming passages for me in the New Testament is in Acts 20, where Paul meets with the Ephesian elders in Miletus. And he says to them, in a time when they're going to weep on each other's necks for leaving Paul for the last time, and Paul looks at them and he says, take care of the flock of God which is put under your care, for I know that wolves will come in among you, and even some of you will be those wolves. Paul was a wolf at one time. Paul recognized wolves among the flock. And part of what the shepherd has to do is sometimes to surprise you. He has a staff that represents comfort, guidance, but he also has a rod that's there for the enemies of the flock. And if he recognizes something coming into the flock, even among you, he may speak a hard word. I had a pastor call my son last night and tell him that he was concerned about some decisions he was making. And my son called me and said, I wonder if I made a mistake, and, he was kind of hard on me. I said, you don't realize that for Pastor Andy, that was a hard call for him to make. To call you on a Saturday night and to say, I hope we're going to see you tomorrow because I'm not sure about your soul. That's tough. It's tough love. But that's the other side, compassion and courage. And then the third aspect of the shepherd's role in your lives is guidance. To help you to walk in paths of righteousness, to use the language of Psalm 23, I like to call it righteous ruts. You have a new pastor who loves systems. I don't know if you knew that yet. But he's going to provide you righteous ruts. If you respond to his leadership and follow in the paths, whether it's this for 40 days, this for 4 weeks, this for this year, those are God-given visions to help lead you. And they represent another area where you can respond to his leadership. God's called Philip, and to some extent Gigi, into this role, but by doing so, he's called you as a congregation to respond to that leadership. Paul said to the Corinthians, what do you want? Do you want me to come to you with a rod or with a spirit of gentleness? What would you like? Would you like the compassionate provision, or would you like the courageous protection and discipline and justice? It is to some extent up to you what face of leadership you'll elicit out of your shepherd, because he'll be here to serve you in whatever ways you need. And you trust that because of the calling that started with God. One last word, and that is for Philip. And that is, if the first place to start is calling, then with that comes an understanding that before you're a shepherd, you're sheep. Psalm 23 begins with some of the most important words in understanding biblical leadership. The Lord is my shepherd. That was said by a king. And in the ancient world, the king was where the buck stopped. The king was the shepherd of the people. But David knew that he had to be a sheep first. And so I would say that biblical leadership is not just about this dynamic together, but about your dynamic. How you respond to God's leadership in your life, the ultimate provider, protector, and guide. And to whatever extent you experience that, you get the right balance when you express it, when it goes through you to other people. And then you realize that for a period of time, you're an expression of God's leadership and an extension of God's leadership by his grace to this flock, which is his. Amen. Philip, I'm going to give you a staff which you can use to remind yourself of who you are